Hello, in just a moment, the press preview. I'll look at what's in the morning papers. First, a reminder of our top stories here tonight here on Sky News. The protests are taking place at New York's JFK Airport against Donald Trump's ban on citizens from 7 mainly Muslim countries entering the US. Theresa May has refused to criticise the move, saying the United States is responsible for its own policy on refugees. And the acting world has been paying tribute to Sir John Hurt, who's died at the age of 77. Hello, you're watching the press preview on Sky News, and joining me this evening is Matthew Syed from The Times and the writer and columnist Christina Patterson to go through the papers. Good evening to both of you. So let's take a look at what's on those front pages then. And The Observer leads with the global backlash against Donald Trump's executive order barring citizens from 7 mainly Muslim countries from entering the United States. The Sunday Telegraph claims the government has admitted that the system for investigating murders in Northern Ireland during the Troubles is not working because it targets soldiers rather than terrorists. The Mail on Sunday attacks what it claims is an NHS directive not to call pregnant patients mothers in case it offends transgender people. The Sunday Express reports on plans to mark the 20th anniversary of Princess Diana's death, including the unveiling of a memorial statue within the grounds of Kensington Palace. And the Sunday People reports that the Queen has approved that statue. Actor and TV presenter Ross Kemp came face to face with armed would-be kidnappers while filming a documentary in Libya, and that's according to The Star on Sunday. So lots to talk about there with Matthew Syed and Christina Patterson. A proper welcome to both of you. You've picked out the front of The Observer to kick off with, and this is the reaction to the executive order signed by Donald Trump last night, just after Theresa May left to fly on to Turkey. They're describing global fury as being the reaction, they say, to what he's done.
Well, one doesn't want to be too gloomy on a Saturday night. However, I have to say that this is one of the darkest moments of our lifetimes. I really do think that the leader of the free world is actually suggesting that people at greatest need from the world's worst war at the moment in Syria literally will not be allowed in their country. Of the 5 million Syrian refugees, people who have been made homeless by the war, 15,000 have ended up in the US. Of those, not one has been associated with any terrorist act. This is discriminating against Muslims. It is breaking the principles of the First Amendment, which are A, that you don't discriminate against people on grounds of religion, and B, that you don't refuse people at greatest need. This is absolutely profoundly shocking, and he did this on World Holocaust Day without even mentioning Jews or anti-Semitism or how these things happen through hate crimes like this. This is a hate crime. The world is rightly, absolutely outraged. All kinds of people can now not get into the US who are going, for example, to see their husbands and wives. Family members can't get back to see their families. Eminent people, Google is worrying about, big chunks of their workforce. And Theresa May is saying, oh, it's America's refugee policy is their business. This is a profoundly shameful, shocking day for America, and I have to say for Britain by association. So I think it's a truly terrible day.
Matthew, do you feel as strongly as Christina?
Well, look, the best I think that can be said for this is that it's democratic. Trump said he would build a wall. He's building a wall. Trump said he was going to change environmental policy. He's doing that. And he said during the election campaign he was going to ban Muslims temporarily from entering the United States. He's following through on a pledge he made in the campaign, one that was voted for by the American public. Having said that, even though it is democratic, I think one has to acknowledge that he did campaign on that platform, and the American public have voted for that. I think it is an indefensible policy. And one of the reasons, partly because of what Christina said about the refugees, but also about its indiscriminate not allowing people from all of these countries, many of whom are very pro-United States and are fighting fundamentalism in those countries, and to ban them from entering the United States. Some really talented people who are working for great high-tech organisations. I think that will alienate the kinds of people who are in the coalition against people like ISIS. I mean, it's interesting, I was looking on Twitter before coming in, Mo Farah, Somalian-born, training in the United States, great athlete. he may not be allowed in. The MP who was born in Iraq on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, him and his
Nadine
wife won't be able to
Zahawi.
go. It's an extraordinary thing. And he's trying to send a signal to his base that he's going to follow through on the claims that he made during the election, but I don't think he's thought through the unintended consequences.
Well, he doesn't think through anything ever, does he? I mean, he changes his mind every 2 minutes. He doesn't have coherent thoughts. We have a 70-year-old child in the White House who is incapable of formulating coherent policy, and all the reports of his first week in the White House are that his officials are running around in abject fear because everything depends on his mood and his latest tantrum. Apparently his weekend post-inauguration he didn't enjoy enough because he was upset that his crowd wasn't as big as Obama's crowd, and therefore he instructed his press secretary to lie to journalists about the size of the crowd. This is not someone who can be trusted to have a coherent thought, to keep a promise, to be reliable, or anything.
And in the meantime, we do have people who haven't been able to get on planes or who are stuck in transit somewhere, not quite clear what's going on. It doesn't seem entirely clear the actual rules behind this. So people believe they may not be able to travel. Immigration lawyers suggesting that certain people, even if they've got green cards, perhaps if they
That's coming straight from the White House about the green cards, actually. So it's not just the immigration people worrying about that. They have been actively told that people with green cards are also affected by this.
So what do you think the fallout could be?
I think it will be challenged in the courts, the constitutional basis of this executive order. I mean, he's the executive branch, but there are separation of powers in the United States, the judiciary who interpret the Constitution, but also the Congress. I mean, these are coming thick and fast. This is one of about 6. I mean, the wall, the environmental policy, there's a few others.
About 5 a day. He's been doing about 5 a day.
It's a remarkable litany of executive orders. I mean, this will be very interesting as a test of the extent to which the executive branch can push through these campaign promises and what Trump will do if he is checked by the Congress. This isn't somebody I think is going to take that with a great deal of equanimity if the courts begin to say that you are overstepping. But I think the other thing, just one quick personal story. My surname's Syed. That's a kind of classic Islamic name. I'm an atheist for what it's worth, but for many years when I go into the United States and I go through passport control, I get taken off to a room with other people with a similar sort of ethnic background to myself, and it takes forever to get through. I love the United States. I think it has been a tremendous force for good, broadly speaking, since it existed as a nation. Massively important. But it does alienate people if they're going to fly out there and they can't get in.
I wouldn't go there for a while if I were you, Matthew.
Yeah.
Well, yes, and they do make the point, the critics make the point that already the US has a very strict vetting system in place already. Let's just get more on the reaction, though, because you mentioned that there are countries that have condemned it. I think Canada and France and Germany have come out criticising this step. Theresa May, however, didn't answer the question a couple of times at a news conference in Turkey, her next step after Washington. She did eventually say it's up to US to determine its policy.
She is in a difficult position because obviously, you know, I would argue that post-Brexit we have economically shot ourselves in the foot. So I understand the need to forge trade deals, and clearly when the president of the free world invites you out there instantly in order to create feelings of a kind of Reagan-Margaret Thatcher relationship, you're going to be hard-pressed to turn down the invitation. And clearly Theresa May wanted to take it up. I think for me, my objection would be, I think the speech she gave in Philadelphia was actually rather impressive in all kinds of ways. It was very measured. She didn't write it, obviously, but it was very measured and careful. But she has talked about how she will be frank with Trump. Well, this is not being frank. There is no way on God's earth that Theresa May, the vicar's daughter, is going to be thinking that what Donald Trump is saying about refugees and migrants and Muslims is going to be something she would agree with. And I'm sorry, but this looks really, really lily-livered. I think we are in the territory of looking like serious appeasement now. And I think one day Theresa May will be seriously ashamed of the fact that she literally said, America's immigration policy is up to America. There are times when you have to say a bit more than that. And, you know, certainly the 1930s was a time like that. And I would argue, I can't think of anything as serious in the Western world that has threatened people's human rights on such a scale as what Donald Trump has done in the last week. And I'm afraid she should have had more courage. So I think this is a shameful moment.
I think she's played it very well. Donald Trump is the democratically elected president of the United States. He's going to be in the Oval Office unless he's impeached for 4 years. And Theresa May's job is to work as effectively as possible with him to further British interests and our values. And my sense in the psychology of this is that Donald Trump's the kind of person who, once you develop a trusting relationship, he thinks that you're on his side, then he starts listening to you. I mean, take his pick for Defence Secretary. He said that Mattis, he will take his advice when it comes to torture and not his own judgment, because they've developed that relationship. I think Theresa May going in there, getting a good relationship with Donald Trump will give her much more leverage in the future. And I think that at this moment, in these delicate early stages, I think with his psychology, which is unpredictable, I think she's played it absolutely right. And I wouldn't be at all surprised. Once they've got that relationship, she'll start to say, you know what, I think you've got this bit wrong, you need to change that.
But what about the Brits who are potentially caught up in this? Has she got to answer to them?
I have no doubt that they've got a huge amount of communication going on between the Home Office and the US Immigration Service. I mean, there'll be a lot of that. But I just think Theresa May at the moment is taking the view, rightly in my view, that she's got to work with this person for 4 years and she can go out there and appease left-wing sentiment in the UK. So this is terrible. And it is terrible, not just left and right. Sorry, let me rephrase that. That was a point. Okay, can I rewind and say that again? I think mainstream legitimate sentiment. She could have said, you know what, that's terrible. But I think she'll have more leverage looking at the psychology of this by getting on side.
OK, quick word on that.
OK, well, you are speaking as if she is dealing with a sane person. Donald Trump agrees with the last person he spoke to. One tiny perceived slight on behalf of the UK and any trade deals will be seriously threatened. But anyway, we are not legally allowed to enter into proper negotiations now. So if we do, we will be seriously jeopardising whatever deals we are offered by the EU. And by the way, even if we get the best possible US deal, we are going to lose 30% of our trading capacity through the EU, through the single market, and the maximum we can get from this is 2%. So all of this grovelling for 2%, I think it's demeaning to Britain, I really do.
No, but these are two different issues. I mean, you can have preliminary talks with the United States about a free trade agreement. You want to get the best deal with Europe too.
Well,
these are not mutually exclusive.
Well, I think they probably are mutually exclusive, actually. But anyway, whatever is said now can't be signed and ratified till after we've left the EU. And do you seriously think Donald Trump is going to hold the same view for the next, however, 2 years? I think it's extremely unlikely he changes his mind every 10 seconds.
OK, let's move on. To another issue and look at the other, just to note actually that story, not as far as I can see on any of the other front pages, but let's move on to the Mail's front. Mail on Sunday, don't call pregnant patients mothers. What's this about?
This is. I mean, you've got to say, it's an interesting story. NHS doctors have been instructed by, I think, the British Medical Association, instead of calling mothers to be mothers, they have to call them, quote, pregnant people. And the reason for this is they don't want to alienate anybody who is a transgender person who is about to have a baby. And we think this is political correctness gone mad, don't we?
We do. We also think, or at least I think, but I think you think this as well, this is extraordinary that the Mail on Sunday is choosing to make this its front page on a day when all this enormous thing is happening about refugees and migrants. However, it has decided the most important issue facing the United Kingdom today is whether or not mothers are called pregnant people. Clearly, this is some crazed edict from some crazed bureaucrat. It is absolutely stark-raving bonkers. And there is a serious issue here now, which is that I know we are not meant to discriminate against transgender persons or whatever you have to call people who say they are transgender, but there are an awful lot of children who are being, I think, encouraged to go into counselling with a view to transitioning, which actually means serious surgery and hormone treatment. And I think there is an element of fashion here, actually. I don't know exactly how or why it's happening, but I think there is too much. I think it's a really, really serious thing for a human being to change their gender. And there is no doubt that some people really do feel trapped in the wrong gender. And those people clearly should feel supported. But this is mad. This is absolutely mad. OK,
we must take a break. Lots to talk about after that break, though, so do stay with us. Coming up, why the royals could disrupt President Trump's state visit later on this year. You join us as we take a look at tomorrow's papers with Matthew Syed and Christina Patterson, and we're going to turn our attention to the Sunday Express because we're getting more details of how Princes William and Harry will honour their mother and pay tribute to her as it's coming up to the 20th anniversary of her death.
Yes, they are planning to have a statue, a permanent statue at Kensington Palace, and apparently the Queen has authorised this. And I mean, I think it must be very strange for them, actually, because the truth is that after all those outpourings of emotion and those banks of flowers when she died, the truth is that her memory has actually really faded. And of course, she was their mother and they adored her, and I'm sure she was a very good mother. But the truth is that for the nation, she does feel a bit like a dim and distant figure now. So it will mean a lot to her and to various people who love Diana, but I think it will also be a bit of a symbol for how quickly people move on to other things, actually.
And Matthew, you noticed the column down the side there as well, Royals on collision course with Trump. What do they say?
Yeah,
now?
so they're worried here that when Trump comes over to the UK for his official visit, that there could be a clash between the eco-warrior Prince of Wales and his two boys, who are also quite environmentally friendly, and Donald Trump, who has a very different position. I think that this is going to be part of a wider narrative of Donald Trump. So he grabbed Theresa May's hand at the White House,
so
didn't he? And it was kind of
so
awkward. She was kind of like, it's kind of like when you get at a bar and anyway.
Like a really bad day.
It was, wasn't it?
God.
And you can just imagine every now and again over the next 4 years, Trump is going to do things that are completely socially unacceptable. And that could easily happen in the way he interacts with the royal family. But then he'll tweet about it and probably post a YouTube video, and you could just see so many diplomatic incidents coming down the track. So it'll be really, I mean, it's sad, but also very interesting.
I know, and I think the thing is the Queen has met, whatever it is, 11 presidents and is used to all manner of things. I think and she's obviously a cool customer, the Queen, in that she's had to deal with pretty much everything through her 90 years. I think she will personally find this very difficult because I think Trump's values are so very, very, very different to hers. But she's a pro. I do think the younger members of the royal family will find it incredibly difficult. Charles is such a passionate environmentalist. I think he will really, really struggle to be polite. And as you say, the younger royals, it will, I mean, on one level they'll be amused, but they won't really be amused. Environmentalism is one of the causes they passionately fight for.
OK, and let's just talk about Labour, because on the front of the Observer there, they're talking about a grassroots revolt. Presumably this is over the Article 50 vote.
This, I think, is interesting because I think Corbyn's absolutely right to back the triggering of Article 50.
He's imposed a three-line whip on his own.
And he's absolutely right about that. There was a referendum, and now that has to be put into effect. What amuses me in a funny kind of way is there's a letter organised by a group called Labour Against Brexit. I mean, obviously you've got the two shadow cabinet people who've already resigned their post saying that Corbyn's backing of the triggering of Article 50 is a betrayal of his socialist values that will hurt working people hardest. Well, if it's going to hurt working people a great deal, the time to have made that argument was before the referendum vote, so the Remainers won the vote. It's no good saying that either you're a Democrat or you're not. Either, socialism is subservient to the idea of democracy. You make your arguments. When you lose, you then have to go with what the people say.
But Matthew, these are not sensible people. I mean, these are people who voted in as their leader someone who is absolutely unelectable. I mean, there is no question about that. This guy is never, ever, ever going to be Prime Minister of this country. They deal, these are. I mean, the demographic analysis has shown that your average Corbynista is a 27-year-old charity worker vegan. So these are not people who are in touch with the people of Sunderland who voted against Brexit. They had nothing to do with that. If they bothered to vote at all, they would have voted Remain. We don't know if they bothered to vote or not because lots of young people didn't. But where I do think, so they're totally out of touch with mainstream Labour, but then they wouldn't have voted for Corbyn if they were in touch with mainstream Labour. Where I don't quite agree with you is I do think that MPs are meant to represent their constituents. And if you were, for example, in my constituency, which is where Diane Abbott is my MP, alas, we pretty much all voted Remain. So if you are going to represent your constituents, I think it would be perfectly sensible to vote against Brexit. If you think that this is going to, if you think that, look, it's not going to make a difference. We're talking about a conscience issue here because not enough people are going to vote against this.
Okay.
So the maths are bound up. But if we're talking about it as a conscience issue, if you believe that it's what you should do is vote according to what your constituents wanted, then I think it's perfectly acceptable to. If you believe that it will make people worse off, and I think the evidence is that it will. I had a presentation on the board of a charity. We had a presentation from the Institute of Fiscal Studies on Monday. The evidence for the economic consequences of Brexit are pretty, they're pretty clear.
We're out of time. I'm so sorry to cut
I just say
in
I
there.
disagree with that.
You can talk about it more at 11:30, and we can also talk maybe a little bit about the 1,000 pair of soccer boots that David Beckham has. We'll talk about that later. He's been called the Imelda Marcos of football. But we must leave it there for now. Matthew and Christine, thanks very much indeed. See you at 11:30.